World building, an art that's growing more and more popular by the day, with legions of tutorials online for it. As far as I've seen, there's a problem with a lot of these tutorials, in that they're only ever about how to make accurate rivers, how to calculate atmospheres, or how to map plate tectonics. I've yet to see a world building video that dives deep into the real fundamentals, because you can have all the most realistic ocean salinity levels and ore deposit charts and still wind up with a tropey, subpar, and generic setting. Now, don't think for a second I'm knocking anyone making these scientific-based how-tos. Many of them do good work, and that side of world building helps a lot of people, but I think a lot of people get misled on what's really important in world building because of it. With this series, I hope to fix some of that, because in the end, the only people who really care that much about geographic fidelity in a setting are mostly just other world builders. And the first place I want to start off with this world building fundamentals series is what I call our core theme. A core theme in world building is much the same as it is in story writing, the central idea or concept in which everything tends to revolve around, either in support of or deliberate contrast to. If you're world building for a story, it's often a good idea to have your core themes of your world building line up with the core themes of your story. That way they can help reinforce each other for a more concise and focused story and setting. Now, for a specific example of core themes, they can range from nebulous debates such as individuality in the face of civilization growing ever more all-encompassing, to something more simple along the likes of mountaineering and alpine living, along with the challenges involved in both. Now, where can you actually get ideas for core themes? Well, I'm going to talk about coming from two different angles here. The first and most likely scenario is that you're world building because you have some sort of idea already. In that case, you simply take your pre-existing idea and break it down into its core themes. For example, I had an idea come to me a while back for a fantasy setting that took place entirely on one colossal mountain that makes up essentially the entire world of that setting. So when I made the idea into a personal world building exercise, I broke that idea down into its core themes, of which I of course ended up with the mountaineering and alpine living core themes. You also aren't restricted to only one core theme either. You can further add into core themes beyond what you've gathered from your initial idea, most likely something that matches your general storytelling sense, writing style, or personal philosophy. So on top of our core themes of mountaineering, we can add in, say, something like the viability of centralized civilization, especially in sub- or non-optimal conditions. The other angle is when you don't have any preset ideas and are essentially making a setting completely from scratch. Say if the responsibility of writing a book or being a GM was suddenly thrust upon you. To which the same general advice I said before when it comes to making additional core themes still applies. Think of some grand concept you think about a lot and run with it. In an early draft of a world building series I wrote years ago but never especially liked and never released, I was working from the total ground up method and decided it upon the core theme of free will and what it really means. Now you might be asking why you actually need core themes to base all your world building around. You might be saying that this idea is too restrictive and it limits your creativity. To which I say, 1, limits breed creativity, and 2, the best settings are those that are focused and tightly designed as opposed to a tosspot of various tropes and references a lot of inexperienced or undisciplined world builders tend to make. I'd also like to clarify what core themes are not. A core theme is not I want to be like Fallout, or I want to make a diesel punk setting. Those would be your inspirations, the places you look to for inspiration and further ideas. Instead, if you want to make something like Fallout or anything else, you need to sit down and reflect what its core theme might be. For Fallout, that depends on who you ask. There's the classic if kind of shallow interpretation of war never changes. Then there's stuff like not to cling to the past, the dangers of unchecked capitalism, the danger of a state authority and imperialism, the strife of resource shortage, people suck, along with some other nihilistic crap, and a million other potential things. Go with what you think the core themes of Fallout or whatever else you're inspired by is, because unless you're pulling from an author quote, it will be different from what the author consciously or unconsciously thought it was. Even if you do have an author quote, you might interpret it differently than what they do, and that, along with creating your own core themes from given inspiration, are very good things, because that is how you create something inspired by something else, as opposed to just ripping it off. As for what to actually do with your core theme, we'll get into with later videos, but essentially your core theme is basically your reference from everything you make in your world building, be it support, contrast, or everything in between. Now, let's look at some of the core themes of what are my personal favorite fantasy settings, Glorantha and Dark Sun. Starting with Dark Sun, because it has to be some of the strongest, most focused, and most well-realized core theming in fantasy, nearly everything in Dark Sun loops back into its core themes, so well it almost makes me blush. Those core themes being resource overuse by tyrannical authority and the brutality of said authority's civilization. The reason Athos is such a brutal desert wasteland isn't because the gods willed it so as some divine punishment, or because it's the material plane of Earth, or some other dull answer. It's because of both how magic in Dark Sun works, and an ancient human-led war. The gist of it being in Dark Sun, there is no ethereal weave to power magic. Instead, all magic has to be powered by the life force of plants. Preserver magic and defiler magic. Take only a little energy, and you leave the plant alive. You're a preserver. Take too much energy, and not only do you kill the plant, but also sap the nutrients from the soil around its roots, making you a defiler. This ties back to resource overuse and the greed around it. The actual reason the entire world of Athos is a brutal wasteland is because of the Cleansing Wars, an ancient human-led defiler war against all the other fantasy races of Athos to a mixed success victory. Those human defiler generals who led the Cleansing Wars used magic to become immortal and all became the tyrannical sorcerer kings of the various city-states. That leads back into the cruel resource-stealing tyrant theme. Even the traditional fantasy races have been reworked into the core themes. That classic Tolkien elven fatalism twisted into a Machiavellian, the world is already dying, so why bother preserving or building anything? Just take and do whatever you want, cheerful fatalism of the Athasian elves, to where they're much as part of the green resource overuse as the human tyrants who tried and failed to wipe them out. And so many other great examples I'm not going to get into here for the sake of levity and letting you all experience it for yourselves. This tight adherence to core themes, whether intentional or not in the original 2nd edition run, overall makes for such a tightly designed and focused setting I consider it a masterclass of world building, far beyond any other D&D setting. And as a side note, if you want to get into Dark Sun, I highly recommend listening to the audiobook of the Prison Pentad book series written by Troy Denning, one of the main creators of the setting, and narrated by Ray Porter. They're criminally underrated books in my opinion, and if you look around you can probably find them for free somewhere. Yet as tightly designed and written as it is, Dark Sun is only my 2nd favorite fantasy setting so far. My true favorite, which while not quite as tightly designed is certainly no slouch in that regard, and beats most any other fantasy settings by a country mile, is Glorantha. Now unlike Dark Sun, the Glorantha books straight up say the core themes of what Glorantha is, religion and the magical relationship of humankind to the gods, which is what most anyone familiar with the setting would conclude even independently, or at least something to a similar effect. Everything in Glorantha relates to its mythology, and I mean absolutely everything. This is a fantasy setting totally void of any science. The world of Glorantha itself is made up of a flat square, not a globe. Seasons exist because of the cycle of death and rebirth of the sun god Yelm as he waxes and wanes in power throughout the year. It's so extreme that to the point a human or any other fantasy race can't even really mature into an adult and have offspring without essentially divine intervention from the fertility god or goddess of their choice. Every person, every culture, every concept is very firmly and tangibly connected to some sort of divine. Even the blank void of nothingness at all is the source of primordial chaos and the chaos gods. That theme of religion also permeates the story and lore of Glorantha and not just its world building. Take the history of Dragon Pass, for example. Dragon Pass has seen a few waves of migrants, 2 of which have been by the same culture groups. The first time Dragon Pass was settled, it was by the early Herotlings, on invitation of dragons and dragon newts that lived in the area. They created the Empire of Worms Friends, a sort of curious, almost Buddhist-esque theocratic empire on account of the Herotlings and other human groups who settled in the area, abandoning their old gods and ways for draconic knowledge. Later, the dragons rose up and killed literally every single person in Dragon Pass. Then another wave of Herotlings came in to settle the area after their homeland became subject to tyranny under the Pharaoh. These barbarian clans kept to their old Orlanthe ways and eventually formed the tribal kingdom of Sartar, still subject to the complex political web of clan and tribal ties and barbarian pagan-esque tribal monarchy. Then the Red Goddess was reborn, and the previously tribal Tarshites, to the north, formed the Roman Empire-esque Lunar Empire. Sartar was then invaded and subjugated in a very Roman style for a while, in which worship of the Red Goddess was enforced, as well as the adoption of the new lunar ways and civilization was forced upon the native Sartarites. Until the Sartarites managed to convince those dragons that killed off the Empire of Worm's friends to give them a hand in a rebellion. All three of these conflicts have been religious in nature, though. The abandonment of Orlanth worship and society by the Empire of Worm's friends in the pursuit of draconic knowledge in spite of Orlanth's lore as a dragon slayer, Sartar retaining their worship of Orlanth while settling in Dragon Pass, again partially out of spite for the Empire of Worm's friends, then the Lunar Empire with its occupation of Sartar and their attempt to kill Orlanth and resurrect him just as Orlanth initially killed the Red Goddess, only for her to be resurrected by the Seven Mothers and have chaos and other elements brought into herself with her rebirth. Another very focused and unique fantasy setting that makes it my personal favorite. Though I've heard the tightness of the writing and focus waver somewhat the further from the core region of Glorantha in Dragon Pass you get. If you want to get into Glorantha, I recommend King of Dragon Pass and its spiritual successors of Six Ages 1 and 2, along with the game RuneQuest, of course. And that's core themes covered. In short, your core themes are your central philosophical points that inform the rest of your world building. You can think of it almost like an art reference when you're drawing. Next week's video is going to be another organized chaos devlog, the tabletop RPG I myself am designing. If you can't tell from both my best examples of world building being from tabletop RPGs, I am very much a fan. The next world building fundamentals video is going to be about inspirations, which I mentioned earlier in this video. I did core themes first, because ideally your core themes should at least somewhat shape where you look to and draw inspiration from. Until then, thank you all for watching, and let me know what you think in the comments. This might not be the most exciting topic in regards to world building, but I think it's a very necessary one that not nearly enough world building channels, if anyone, actually talks about.